Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show, which is presented to you by Power Planter Earth Augers, the official digging tool. To find the right size for your digging project, visit powerplanter.com. Now here are your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Welcome back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show. Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in the inventor of the straw bale gardening method. We're going to go to the land of 10,000 lakes. We're going to head up to Minnesota.
Well, Joel Karsten is the author and inventor of the straw bale garden method. He's published a number of books now in many different languages, and it's been distributed into a lot of countries, and many people now follow the straw bale garden method. Thank you for coming on the show today, Joel.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys. Hey, Holly. Hey, Joey.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know that you've been doing the rounds on radio in Canada and America here, instructing and teaching people how to, and the reasons why somebody may want to look at growing in straw bales.
Yeah, the amazing thing is not everybody knows about straw bale gardening yet. You know, I speak to groups and audiences and whatnot, and I still get, you know, a good percentage of people that say, wow, I've never heard of this before. And you kind of bang yourself on the side of the head. I've been doing this now for 29 years. But I guess not everybody gets exposed to it all the time. So and we always talk about, you never know who's listening or watching you. And it's always interesting where and these people are at and they're appreciative, how appreciative they are of you providing information to them. It makes a very big difference even to them. So we always like that. Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, we're on a bunch of stations across the country, some big farm areas that have a lot of straw bales that can be utilized. Let's get into how did you come up with the straw bale garden method? I know you said you've been doing this for about 29 years. Where did this baby start at?
Yeah, I grew up on a crop and dairy farm down in southwest Minnesota. And as a little kid on a dairy farm, you bale a lot of straw, a lot of hay. Every once in a while, you'd have a bale with a broken string. We'd throw it against the barn. And, of course, it would get rained on a couple of days later, so we'd just ignore it for the rest of the summer. And by the middle of the next summer, that bale had decomposed quite a bit, and the biggest, tallest, healthiest, greenest thistles on the whole farm were the ones that would grow out of these bales laying by the barn. And I would notice that even as a little kid. Now, we fast forward about 15 years from that point, and I graduate from the University of Minnesota. I get a degree in horticulture, and I buy a house. Well, it turns out this property that I bought had about 1 inch of topsoil. And, a normal gardener would build raised beds. That's what a normal vegetable gardener in that situation would do. But I had a problem. I had just graduated college, and I had just bought my first house, so I didn't have the money to build raised beds. But I did remember these bales that used to lay by the barn. And I thought, if thistles grow so well, then peppers and tomatoes should grow pretty well too. So I started some experimenting, and one thing led to another, and I sort of perfected this methodology for how to make it work. And it took a few years. I always joke that for the first 14 years, nobody cared except me and my family and a few friends and neighbors and colleagues, and that was about it. And then 15 years ago, I got on TV, and that was the beginning of the explosion of straw bale gardening. So.
Well, and you got on a little paper on the East Coast called the New York Times that kind of puts you on the map, too.
Yeah, that was helpful. Yeah, that's for sure. You get a full page right up in the New York Times, and it's amazing what that does for you.
Well, I want to go back to the story whenever you and your dad was figuring this out. There was a point where your dad said, no more, we're not doing this, because there was so many people stopping by the house wanting to know what this was.
Exactly, yeah. He called me up one day, and he said, this was in August, end of the first season, and he said, your mom and I can't take this anymore. No more straw bale gardening. I said, well, what's wrong? I thought it was going so well. Tomatoes are coming in so good. He said, oh, it's great. But he said, when you got 8-foot-tall tomatoes coming out of straw bales in your front yard in this neck of the woods, everybody who drives by pulls off and wants an explanation. And he said, it takes us a half an hour to explain everything. And he said, I'm not sure we're doing it justice anyway. So he said, you either got to build a fence in front of that garden, some wooden fence so nobody can see the garden, or you need to write all this information down, and then I'll just put a mailbox right by the garden and tell people to take a flyer instead of asking, ringing the doorbell and wanting information. So that's kind of how my first book got started. It was a 3-page flyer that turned eventually into a 65-page little how-to book that I that I first self-published. And then the publisher saw that, and then picked up the ball and ran with it. So.
Right, definitely very successful. Now, how is this method unique to regular ground gardening, or how is it also unique to methods like a container garden or even a raised bed?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, especially when you compare it with traditional gardening methods, there's a lot of advantages. The number one observable one is that you don't have to bend over as far. So that's one of the reasons raised bed gardeners do raised beds, is because of that. Another reason raised bed gardeners like raised beds is because the beds tend to warm up earlier than the soil does. Well, the great advantage we have with straw bale gardening is the inside of that bale. When we begin this process, we do what's called the conditioning process, and that's where we grow bacteria. And when those bacteria are growing in that bale, for that first 2 weeks, those bales get really hot. Sometimes they'll get 130, 140 degrees inside that bale. And then they start to cool off a little bit at the end of the conditioning period, and then you're ready to plant. But when you're planting, you could be planting a tomato into a bale that's 80, 90, 95 degrees versus in the soil right next to the bale where it's only 55 degrees. So for warm season crops in particular, you get this big boost, this big jump start at the beginning of your season, which tends to push the crop a little faster. You get earlier blossoms, you get earlier fruit, and you're the first one in the neighborhood with ripe tomatoes.
and that's a bragging point, yeah.
That's right. You won if that happens, right?
Well, let's talk about, there are a lot of things in which one can grow in a straw bale. But there are some things in which you advise people to avoid. What are some of those, and what are the reasons behind those particular crops that you say shy away from?
Right. I don't like to grow sweet corn in bales. It takes a whole bale to grow 3 stalks corn, and they're a little crowded even in one bale because they get such big roots, and they're so tall, they tip over easily. So avoid doing that. And then perennial type crops like rhubarb and asparagus that come back from the same root every year. Because remember, within 3 years, there'll be nothing left of that bale but a little hump of soil in your garden. And that's about it. So they're going to completely decompose. And your asparagus would be growing up on top of a hump, and you don't want that. The other things I haven't had great luck with in my climate is onions have not done well. And I get people from down south that love the onions they grow in their straw bales. But up in the northern climate up here, I haven't had great luck with onions. Rosemary is one of the only herbs that doesn't love the straw bale garden. So rosemary doesn't do as well. And other crops like basil do amazingly well. So it kind of makes up for it. But and then I haven't had great luck with Brussels sprouts for some reason. I don't know what the reason could be for that, but I think they just don't seem to love the straw bales. So there's a few weird things, but overall, pretty much anything you would plant in a traditional soil garden in this part of the world is going to grow really well in a straw bale garden. And there's a few things you can plant that grow well in straw bales but wouldn't grow very well in the soil. One of those being sweet potatoes. Tough to grow up this far north in Minnesota, but they do really well in the bales.
Well, for people who are listening to this and trying to get a visual, are we growing the product out of the side of the bale, the top of the bale? Where or how is that being?
All of the above.
Okay, all right.
I tell people it should look like the fleece on a sheep. When you get to the 1st of July, you shouldn't be able to see any straw anymore. So if you got some straw showing on the side, you can stick a basil plug right in the side of the bale. You can plug. I do lots of lettuces like kale and things. I'll stick plugs right in the side of the bale. And then, so you plant your normal stuff that you're going to do, especially if you're going to do seeds. You almost have to do those on the top of the bale. Peas and beans and carrots and radish and, kohlrabi and that kind of stuff I do from seed. And then if you do transplants, you got an option. You can plant them in the top of the bale, or you can plug them into the side. Now, if you plug them in the side, I want you to plant them really deep. So you need to make a hole in the side of that bale. What works really good for that is a shovel handle or a rake handle. Just shove that right between the 2 strings, nice and deep, kind of work it around a little bit, make a hole, and then get the root way down deep in that bale. So it gets moisture and it gets nutrients. Don't plant it on that outside crust, because the outside inch or two of that bale is going to be dry and it kind of creates a crust on the outside, so it's not going to get a lot of moisture. So push that plug way deep. Even if you bury some of the branches, that doesn't matter. That plug will come right out the side of the bale eventually. You can also do flowers if you want in the side of the bale. And if you don't like the look of the bales, you could fill it in with flowers if you like.
Well, let's talk about the type of bale. Now, can we predominantly do straw bale from wheat.
Right.
Is that the best, or can you do hay? Is there a bale type of material that is better than others? What have you found?
Well, I started out using straw because straw is a lot cheaper, less expensive than hay bales. But the truth of the matter is you can really use any organic material that you can find that decomposes quickly, because all organic material eventually decomposes and becomes soil. So we use straw because it's convenient and cheap, and it's accessible, and it's already in these nice little bricks all with strings around it, so it's very convenient. But there's a lot of places in the world where we do straw bale gardening method, but we use other material like sugarcane stalks or rice straw, or even baled palm tree fronds, shredded palm tree fronds. You can shred them up real fine, and you can bale that what's left, and that will decompose and become a media that your vegetables can grow in. So hay bales will work. If you got moldy hay bales or you found some inexpensive hay bales, that'll work. There's always a question of how many weed seeds are going to be in the bale, and we try to keep our straw bale gardens as weed-free as possible. It's one of the things I brag about is that you don't have to pull a lot of weeds. So if you use a hay bale and that hay is made from grass that wasn't harvested all summer, so those seed heads were all mature when you cut and baled that grass, now you're going to get lots of sprouts out of that hay bale. But a lot of times hay is, the grass is cut 2-3 times a summer, or if it's clover hay, it's cut at 1/10 flower. There's not going to be any mature seeds in there. The drawback of a hay bale is it has a lot of protein in it, which converts to nitrogen, but it decomposes really fast. So you really only get one season of growth. If you use a straw bale, you're very apt to get 2 years out of that bale. Sometimes you got to reconnoiter it the second year, kind of gather the bale together and wrap it with some chicken wire. But the second year bales are great for root crops like potatoes and carrots, beets, that kind of stuff in your second year bales, or a cool season crops too. You got to remember that the warm season crops love that warmth from the decomposition, but the second year you don't get that same warmth in the bale. The bale's already decomposed on the inside, so you just basically plant.
No reconditioning required on that second year at all.
Yeah, you might add a little nitrogen just to refresh it a little bit. If you're using organic, just a little cup of blood meal or 2 cups of blood meal on top of a bale, water it in. Or if you're using lawn fertilizer, just a cup of 3/4 of a cup of lawn fertilizer on top and a little water and refresh the nitrogen, because nitrogen will leach out. It's a soluble nutrient. So it gets rained on all winter and snowed on, and then the snow melts and it carries a lot of that nitrogen out. So just freshen that up a little bit and then go ahead and plant.
Now, for people who are not in farm country, who are listening to the program, where is a good place to find straw bales? I know you've been to all corners of the earth, and there's places where there's not mechanical balers, where they physically have to cram it into a box and then tie it off.
They can make their own.
Yeah. Where's the best place that you would suggest somebody would start looking for bales?
Well, start at your garden center. A lot of times a garden center, if you're just going to do a couple bales, you can pay a little bit more markup and get it direct from a garden center. If you go on the Craigslist or the Facebook Marketplace, a lot of times that's where farmers advertise nowadays, because that's the modern classified ad, right? So you'll find farmers there that will advertise. If you're going to do a big straw bale garden, you should really start looking for bales the fall before you're going to need them the next spring. I get mine delivered in September, right when they come off of the field. They bale them up and I get them delivered right away. That way they're less expensive. And I just put them right back where I'm going to have my garden the next spring. They get rained on and snowed on all winter. And the next spring I add that nitrogen and water, and that begins that rapid decomposition. But you can set them outside over the winter. That doesn't hurt anything at all. They'll be in great shape. So start there. If you can find a farmer, that's your best bet, is go direct to the farmer. But sometimes you gotta know a farmer who knows a farmer who knows a farmer. One of those kind of deals. They eventually find them. But you'll be surprised. I tell people, when you become a straw bale gardener, you start to see straw bales where you never saw them before. At Christmas time, you'll go driving by the church, and everybody's looking at the baby Jesus, and you're thinking, I wonder what the church is going to do with all those straw bales when that nativity scene is done, right? So you start thinking about straw bale gardening. See people use them as insulation around their well house or around their trailer house. Sometimes they'll use them around the base. Or people use straw bales for all kinds of things that you wouldn't expect.
You start
fall decoration.
People call it. Then you're the crazy person, because you're thinking all these things that you can use with straw bales and trying to figure out how to get a hold of them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, now you have a book that's come out recently, and what is the name of that book? And can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, Strawberry Garden's Complete. It's a second edition of the first writing. It's just got three more chapters or so in it. We show people how to build this really cool 6-week greenhouse, I call it. It's little 2 cattle panels, if anybody's familiar with that, 16 feet long, 50 inches wide. Farmers use them to build cattle fence. But we take these fence panels and we hump them up so that they kind of make an archway. And we put 2 of them together, and then we cover that with polyethylene film, and we put 6 straw bales inside of it. And as soon as you start the conditioning process, the bales will heat the greenhouse. And you can use that for seed starting, putting it outside about 6 weeks before your normal planting time is when you would start it. So then you have 6 weeks of greenhouse where you can get nice warm bottom heat on your seed trays sitting on top of these bales out in this little greenhouse. And it's just the most convenient thing. Then when the season comes along, you take your trays out off the top of the bales and you go plant your seed plugs, all your seed starts, in your straw bales out in the normal garden, and then those 6 bales that were in the greenhouse, you pull the cover off of this plastic cover off of this greenhouse, and you plant the bales, and then the tomatoes and cucumbers crawl up over top of these arched cattle panels, and it creates a cool little garden like a tunnel. We talk all in the book about how to build that. That's one of the things that's added. Of course, we cover all the basics of the straw bale gardening method, but I'm just talking about what's additional in this latest book.
Well, it seems like with that greenhouse, it would be very inexpensive to construct something like that.
Yeah, under $100. Yeah, completely under $100. But it's about $78 if you really get down to the nuts and bolts to build the whole thing. So it's pretty inexpensive. And then you get free heat out of the bales. That's the good part. Another thing that's in that book that I've never written about before, but I did a whole bunch of research on, is growing mushrooms on purpose in straw bales. And that was really a fun project. We grew Phoenix oyster, Chinese oyster, black oyster, and one other oyster mushroom, and then wine caps. And you got to pasteurize the bale, and I show you how to do that, and then you inoculate it. And about 3 weeks later, you got three or 4 5-gallon pails of mushrooms off of each bale.
That's worth the emission right there, because a lot of people want to grow their own mushrooms. Not for psychedelic purposes, but for kitchen purposes.
Yeah. Oh, you've got to really like mushrooms if you do more than 1 bale, because you get a ton of mushrooms out of them.
Well, Joel, how can we find out more about the straw bale garden method, and where can we get the book at, and all your books?
Yeah, I got a couple of websites, but the best one for people to go to is called strawbalegardenclub.com. And it is a club, but it's a free club. So you can come and join the club for free. You can watch videos. We got over 100 HD filmed videos with professional sound, and it's really well done. And lots of blog entries, and there's a forum. If anybody ever has questions, they can ask questions on there, and I'll go and answer your questions for you. So, it's a great opportunity for people to get to know Straw Bale Garden Club.
Well, Joel, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day and enlightening people who have never heard of this method before, and hopefully that they will venture into this. We've done it for many years and found wonderful success with this particular type of gardening method. So we thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. Good luck with the gardening season this year, all right?
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.